listener production. Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. As delegates from more than 200 countries meet to negotiate the future of global climate change this week, US President-elect and climate change skeptic Donald Trump is casting a long shadow. The world's scientists say the window to avert the worst of the climate crisis is closing fast. So does 4 more years of Trump mean we're basically doomed? Maybe not.
Without the US in the room, it's a chance for Beijing to say, we are able to shape the global order in ways that help to tackle the climate crisis.
Reasons to think we are winning the fight against climate change, no matter who's in the White House, in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Antoinette Lattouf. It is Wednesday, November 13.
G'day, Sasha. Hello, everyone. So if you're wondering where Trump's legal cases are up to, I have at least one update for you. A judge has paused all decisions in Donald Trump's hush money case. So, quick refresher, this was the case that back in May found him guilty on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in a scheme to influence the 2016 election. So the judge had been due to decide on whether to throw out the conviction altogether, and that's because in July, the Supreme Court ruled that sitting presidents had immunity from criminal prosecutions for any official acts taken during their time in office. So now that decision has been halted for at least a week, and it may impact Trump's sentencing, which was due to be handed down on November 26. Sasha, that is, of course. The sentencing will only happen if the matter proceeds.
Yeah, and given his win and the Supreme Court's ruling, it is highly unlikely we'll see the president-elect behind bars for this. And look, there's a good chance as well that the conviction will be quashed altogether. Also out of the US, we've seen sales for the morning after pill surge in the wake of Trump's win. So we heard reports of this initially, but now some numbers are actually coming out. A sexual and reproductive telehealth company called Wisp has reported a 1,000% jump. Another company reported a 315% increase the day after the election, which is now getting up closer to about 1,000% as well. So it is, and both of them made the point that this wasn't just one pill being bought, this was multiple packets. So they think that women are stockpiling these. And this is, of course, because there are a lot of questions over how Trump is going to handle reproductive rights once he takes the White House.
Sticking with the US, but shifting gears somewhat to TikTok, there is a possible reprieve for Americans who love TikTok now that Trump's in charge, because the incoming president is said to want to halt the ban on social media platform that was introduced by the Biden administration. The measure, enacted with bipartisan support, came earlier this year, and there is a 19th of January deadline for Chinese firm ByteDance to either sell its stake in TikTok or face a ban in the United States. We do know that Trump and Biden, Sasha, will be meeting tomorrow at the White House. We don't know what's on the agenda, but their wives aren't meeting.
Yeah, so Melania Trump is ditching. There's a traditional morning tea between the outgoing First Lady and the incoming First Lady. So that is Dr. Jill Biden, who is on her way out, and Melania Trump, who's on her way in. Melania has said, nah, not going. A quick trigger warning on this next story. It discusses child sexual abuse. You can skip ahead 2 minutes if you'd rather not listen. The global leader of the Anglican Church has resigned over a sexual abuse scandal. It's after a report found the UK-based Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, failed to alert authorities to the actions of barrister John Smythe. He physically and sexually abused over 100 boys and young men from the UK, Zimbabwe and South Africa for decades. Smythe set up and ran summer camps for young Christians, and it is believed the abuse began as early as the 1970s. He died in Cape Town in 2018 while wanted for police questioning and without ever facing trial.
So the Archbishop, who's the spiritual leader of the globe's 85 million Anglicans, last week apologised for not conducting a thorough investigation after learning of the allegations back in 2013, and that's when he first took the reins of the church. However, he's maintained he had no idea or suspicion prior to then. So Welby's been accused by church officials of allowing this abuse to continue between 2013 and Smythe's death, which you just mentioned, in 2018. And in his resignation, Welby said he had sought and was granted the permission of the King to step down, saying, "I hope this decision makes clear how seriously the Church of England understands the need for change and our profound commitment for creating a safer church." So what's next, Sasha? This next appointment requires a body of clerics and a chair nominated by the British PM, and they're required to put 2 names forward.
Yeah, so there are a couple of successors who are in line. One of them, Guli Frances Dakani, she's the Bishop of Chelmsford. She was born in Iran and has spoken about how her brother was murdered in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. And if she is successful, she'll become the first woman in the top job.
Back home now, the federal government is doing all it can to get everyone on board for its social media ban for kids under the age of 16. The Education and Communication Ministers have now written to the country's principals and parents associations asking for their support in implementing the new restriction, which would raise the minimum age from 13 by 3 years.
Yeah, in the letter, Jason Clare and Michelle Rowland told mums, dads and educators that we want to work with you to help ensure we get this guidance right. And of course, it's probably a key move that needs to be done in the lead up to this being enacted, because you need teachers and principals and parents on board with this. The plan has both the support of the Coalition and the states and territories, and the bill will be introduced to Parliament by the end of the week.
Yeah, I think, Sasha, it's important to point out that this ban won't start for at least a year, and there are quite a few things to nut out by then. But it looks like, given that both major parties are in broad agreement, there are a couple of sitting weeks left in this term, so it does seem likely the government will be able to achieve its aim of passing the legislation by the end of the year. But it doesn't mean that 15-year-olds will be kicked off TikTok next week or even in a year's time. And there are still a whole bunch of questions about how it will practically work, particularly for current users. And it does seem that parents aren't going to be punished or policed if they override the ban and say, hey, kiddo, it's okay, I give you permission at 13, you can keep using it.
Yeah, and the government's kept kind of making the point that the onus will be on the social media companies, but we've talked about it before, is that what impetus do these companies have to go, sure, Australian government, we'll do what you ask of us. We already know Elon Musk doesn't like to do what the Australian government asks of him, so I can't see X being greatly on board with this, but time will tell, we'll see. I'm interested to know, you've got 2 young daughters. How are they feeling and how are you feeling about this idea of kicking kids off social media if they're under 16?
Look, I personally feel great about it because my daughter is 12 and she doesn't have a phone and she doesn't have any social media, unlike pretty much all of her friends. So she feels like a social pariah amongst her friends. And I was able to say, look, Anthony Albanese says mummy is right. It's not good for you.
It's the government's fault.
And so for me, it's bought me a bit more time. And I do know that a lot of her friends have been on TikTok. Look, they're not rushing to be on X, let's be honest. I've been on TikTok since they were 8.
Wow.
And I find that problematic, but their parents are on board with it. So hopefully now this will give parents a reason. And it's really hard. It's really hard when kids say, everybody else but me, I'm going to be bullied, I'm being left out, which is the sort of things I'm hearing, to be able to say, look, the evidence is out and it seems that this is not good for you. So let's blame Anthony Albanese.
And a drum roll, please, for the worst Aussie products and services of 2024. Yes, it is the annual Shonky Awards today. So Consumer Group Choice has named and shamed a bunch of companies, starting with Meta, for failing to protect Australians from scams. Now, scams where contact came from WhatsApp, Facebook and Instagram accounted for 76%, so more than 3/4 of all reported social media scam losses in 2023. NIB also got a gong for charging single parents more for health insurance than couples, Antoinette.
Yeah, that's pretty shocking. But for me, the next one is the most shocking because I feel personally affected by this. The Daily Juice Company got a Shonky Award for selling a green juice without veggies in it. And also not disclosing that its green colour actually comes from food colouring. Like, I'm a schmuck who falls for anything that looks green and I'll consume it. A stick vacuum by Acepure has copped an award for scoring just 10% on a performance test. And last but not least, a Shonky for Grounding Well's grounding socks. They make some pretty bold claims to reverse ageing, improve sleep and reduce pain. But Choice says none of these claims are supported by evidence and that the socks are even badly made.
Yeah, we love the shonkies every time they come out each year. Look, there was a couple of responses from some of the companies that were named in this year's shonkies. They weren't asked to give you thank you speeches, but here they are. So an NIB spokesperson tried to defend the cost of a single parent paying more for health insurance than a couple for their kids. They acknowledged that a single parent wanting to add one child to their policy will pay more than couples with one child on the equivalent policy. But under the increased cost of a single parent policy, there was, quote, no limit to how many children could be included. Sure, Jan.
And a spokesperson for Bega Group, which owns the Daily Juice Co., said that the company's green juice products ceased production in September and they're no longer available in supermarkets.
Always read your ingredients. It was an interesting choice. Actually, when they were doing this testing for the juice, they checked the ingredients and blended them all together to see what colour they came out. And they came out looking like orange juice, which is, so it was not a green thing in sight, apparently, despite being a green juice. Although the company also said, we never said it had vegetables in it, but Choice makes the counterclaim that, well, if it's called a green juice, most consumers are going to reasonably think there's got to be a vegetable in there somewhere. Antoinette, thank you so much for joining us for the headlines today. Next up, we're getting into our deep dive about why a Donald Trump presidency might not spell disaster for climate change action.
Hey, Bension here. There are many valid reasons to feel depressed and hopeless when it comes to the climate crisis. But is there some reason, any reason, to feel hopeful, even optimistic about it? Delegates from more than 200 countries are meeting in Azerbaijan for the COP29 Global Climate Change Conference this week. In case you've heard it floating around the news, COP is the annual United Nations meeting where countries negotiate with each other over how to solve the climate crisis. Here's what President of COP29, Mukhtar Babayev, told the conference on Monday.
Colleagues, we are on the road to ruin. But these are not the future problems. Climate change is already here. From flooded homes in Spain to forest fires in Australia. From rising oceans in the Pacific to barren plains in East Africa. COP29 is an unmissable moment to chart a new path forward for everyone.
As we all know, Donald Trump, who often falsely describes climate change as a hoax, is about to return to the White House. Trump plans to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Accord. That's the most important global agreement countries have signed up to date to fight climate change, just like he did in his first term. He plans to, quote, drill baby drill, ramping up fossil fuel production in the United States. And he plans to axe a host of laws, regulations and public funding that right now work to fight climate change in the US, the second largest carbon emitting country in the world. So are we about to miss our unmissable moment? Does Donald Trump's election kill our last chance to save ourselves from climate catastrophe? The man you're about to meet does not think so. Dr. Wesley Morgan is a research associate with the Institute for Climate Risk and Response at the University of New South Wales. Wesley, welcome to the briefing. Are we doomed?
We are definitely not doomed. So, Trump is a climate change denier, and he has, told fossil fuel interests that he will do what they want. So that is a setback. Let's be real about that. But the reality is that Trump cannot stop the global shift towards clean energy. So the world has changed an awful lot since he last came to power in 2016, right? So what has happened since then? In 2018, global investment in clean energy, so things like wind, solar, batteries, EVs, that has overtaken investment in fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas. And this year, global investment in clean energy technologies will be roughly double global investment in fossil fuels. And this is now where the world is heading. And there's nothing Trump can do about that. He, as a climate denier, he's a bit, an old man yelling at clouds in a world that has really moved past him, including in the United States. In 2016, he promised to bring back coal jobs in the United States, but he did not do that. And this time around, he won't be stopping global momentum towards clean energy either.
Is there a possibility that there's some wishful thinking there, though? Because Donald Trump will be the president. He has control of effectively the Supreme Court. He has the control of the Senate. There's all likelihood that he may, the Republicans that is, but under him, have control of the House as well. Why are you so confident that he won't have the power to undo progress on climate action?
I mean, there's two things. So there's thinking about the United States and then there's thinking globally. But even in the United States, under the US system, it will be a little scary that he will have a lot of power, depending on how things go in the House in particular, right? If he ends up with the executive and the House and the Senate and a Supreme Court that sort of looks favourably upon Trump, that is a worry. But in the US system, it's a federal system, so states have considerable power as well. And we see states like California. California is actually the fifth largest economy in the world, and California is committed to achieving net zero by 2045. Even Trump's backers, so people like Elon Musk, he makes a living from selling electric vehicles. So there's going to be this momentum towards clean energy technology, even under Trump. And Biden, while Biden has been in power, he has spent $500 billion Australian dollars on stimulating clean energy industries. So things like battery manufacturing in the US, electric vehicles, solar, wind. And Trump's not going to wind all of that back because the majority of that money is actually subsidizing factories that are being built in Republican congressional districts and Republican states. So, they're building these battery factories, these EV factories with subsidies from the federal government. And we've already seen Republicans come out saying publicly that they don't want these subsidies and tax credits to be repealed. But the other thing is that the US is only a small part of the global picture now. Countries like China is dominating global production of wind, solar, EVs, batteries, and their supply chains. So, if the US says we're going to move away from climate action, they're really just dealing themselves out of the room where the future is being decided, and other countries are going to step up to the plate, China, the European Union, and really that's an opportunity for Australia as well, because we're really well positioned to supply the critical minerals that are used in these new clean energy technologies. We're a very lucky country with lots of resources, and we will be as the global economy continues to shift towards net zero as well.
We've got the Global Climate Conference, COP, this week. With this outcome in the US, what do you think the climate negotiations are going to end up at, given that?
This has happened before. In 2016, when Trump came to power, everyone was in shock at that year's UN climate talks in Morocco. But I think this time around, all the diplomats and everybody involved, they will have more of a plan as to what to do with Trump threatening to walk away from the Paris Agreement. And I think what we'll see is other countries doubling down on their commitment to cooperate to tackle climate change. I mean, the key thing here is the 2015 Paris Agreement. It took them 25 years to negotiate this thing between nearly 200 countries. That's a whole generation where the diplomats came together to negotiate this global agreement, and countries don't want to walk away from that, right? It was really hard to get that agreement. The United States has walked away before. So they walked away from the Kyoto Protocol in 2000 under George Bush, and then Trump threatened to walk away from the Paris Agreement in his first term. And what's really interesting is no other country followed Trump. So you've got nearly 200 other countries that are saying, well, no, we are going to double down on the rules that we have agreed. So, it can feel like a bad day, but the rest of the world's going to keep getting on with the job.
What is the economic incentive for the rest of the world to fill that vacuum? Because I guess Trump's argument is America first, we don't want to do it, so we're not going to do it. Why would any other country do it?
because that's tomorrow's economy, right? So, we have these technologies now that are available to us now. Like in Australia, we have all these coal-fired power plants that are closing because they're getting old. They're literally failing. They need to be replaced. And no business, nobody's proposing to build a new coal-fired power plant in Australia because there are cheaper ways to generate electricity with wind and solar and storage. So the economics has shifted away from fossil fuels. And, the countries that can see that writing on the wall, they're investing really heavily in these new opportunities. Countries like China, where just this year, the sale of electric vehicles overtook the sale of fossil fuel cars in China. So, we're seeing this huge investment, wind, solar, electric vehicles. And it's a bad bet to try and go backwards when there are cheaper and cleaner alternatives.
Australia is looking to host the climate conference in 2026 along with Pacific Island nations. What do you think should Australia's strategy be now that we know Trump is going to be the president?
See, Australia, we're a middle power on the global stage. We're never going to be able to throw our weight around like the United States or like China or like Europe. And so we have a really strong interest in what's called a rules-based global order. So when countries make agreements on trade or on security, we want them to stick to their agreements, right? Because that's in the interests of countries like ours that are not dominating the scene. And climate's no different. So countries have worked together for a generation to come to this Paris Agreement to cut emissions. And if you have countries saying, nah, we're just going to rip up our targets and we're just going to abandon the Paris Agreement, that's just really not in Australia's interest. Climate change is damaging Australians every day right now, right? We're seeing like the black summer bushfires, unprecedented flooding, heat waves in our cities. We have every reason to be doubling down on global cooperation to tackle climate change. And it's responsible middle powers like Australia that if the US is going to abandon the field, we need to be the ones stepping up to the plate. And we expect that the host of the UN climate talks in 2026 will be announced in the next fortnight. And it will be a huge deal. Like if Australia hosts the UN climate talks in 2026, it'll be the biggest diplomatic summit that Australia's ever hosted. And certainly the most significant. We can expect more than 30,000 people to come. We'll be in the global spotlight for much of that year. It's a really big opportunity for Australia to signal to the world that we are shifting away from fossil fuels towards our clean energy future, which really is where our prosperity will lie and really important for the security of Australian communities as well.
Clean energy is one of the ways in which China asserts its soft power around the world. It invests in renewable energy projects in developing countries in order to be that money rather than America. Do you think that a Trump presidency means that China steps into a power vacuum that the US is leaving?
Yes and no. So China is investing very heavily in clean energy technologies, but China remains actually the biggest emitter today. Not the biggest historic emitter, right? And not the biggest emitter per person. But right now, today, China is the world's biggest emitter. So with great power comes great responsibility. So yes, if the US walks away, there will be a lot of expectation that China will take on some responsibility for global efforts to tackle climate change. I mean, the whole world needs China to be moving as fast as possible away from coal-fired power. And they might seize this opportunity. Without the US in the room, it's a chance for Beijing to say, we are able to shape the global order in ways that help to tackle the climate crisis. But look, in Washington, there is bipartisan concern about losing a technological edge to China. So even if the US withdraws from the Paris Agreement, I think we'll see some continuation of federal government support for things like, US manufacturing of electric vehicles and US manufacturing of batteries. And, that fits with Trump's rhetoric that he doesn't want China to be making everything, right? He wants to be making things in the US as well. So I think it'll be a mixed bag. The US is not going to abandon the field completely, even if they walk out of the Paris Agreement.
Well, Wesley Morgan, thanks so much for bringing some optimism in these potentially dark times. We really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks so much for having me.
Dr. Wesley Morgan there. He's a research associate with the Institute for Climate Risk and Response at the University of New South Wales, as well as a fellow with the Climate Council of Australia. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. We would love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might be in need of some positive climate news. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed this afternoon from 3. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.
Listener.